We had a very, very, very interesting matchup coming up here. South Carolina versus LSU. And wow, was that game an absolute thriller. I'm going to be honest with you guys, that was probably the best college football game I've seen this year. Texas, Michigan, I thought last week would have been the game of the year, but Texas basically beat the crap out of Michigan. And honestly, coming into this week, I actually was taking South Carolina over LSU. And unfortunately, because of the fact that LaNorris Sellers went down early on in the third quarter, the momentum kind of shifted and Robbie Ashford just wasn't able to put it together and take South Carolina over the top. And we're going to talk about this game because what we saw early on from South Carolina, going up 17-0, a team that's, I don't want to use the word inexperienced, but at some of the key positions, you kind of are inexperienced. You got a true freshman starting on the defense in Deion Stewart, who's probably one of the best players in the country already, which is kind of crazy to think. He's a true freshman. At the same time, at left tackle, you got Josiah Thompson. Phenomenal football player. I mean, absolutely incredible if you guys ask me. He did a lot of really, really good things. I know the broadcast crew kind of pointed him out a little bit. LSU obviously does have some veterans on the defensive line, and they're going to be able to take advantage of the South Carolina offensive line. But given what LSU's defensive line is and what South Carolina's O-line is at this point, I felt like South Carolina did a really, really good job. But again, inexperienced. You have a quarterback in LaNorris Sellers who's, he's a redshirt freshman. He doesn't have a lot of experience, but you can see the flashes. You can see the upside. He took one play, I think 66 yards to the house. It was an absolute incredible play by Sellers. He made the proper read. He pulls the football. He takes it 66 yards. But more than that, the guy made plays through the air. He was 9 of 16, 113 yards. Obviously, he can continue to get better throwing the ball through the air, but that's something that generally takes time. And then on the other end, LSU has what some people believe is going to be a top 10 pick in the NFL draft in quarterback Garrett Nussmeier. And what's interesting about him is, I wouldn't say he struggled necessarily, but he wasn't that good early on in the game. Right? Nussmeier definitely had some bad plays. He got saved a couple of times, I would say, in this game. I think there were some bad penalties called on South Carolina. There were some, specifically in the backfield, on the defensive backfield. To me, South Carolina should have won this game. Right? I think South Carolina essentially gave this game away to LSU, and I don't know if you can rank South Carolina after a loss, but I almost feel like they should fall within one of the top 25 teams. I think they were ranked like 28th coming into this game anyway, so it's not like they're that far outside of it. But South Carolina is legit, man. I don't care what anybody says. The fact that these guys have a freshman at left tackle, they have a couple of freshmen starting on the offensive side. They're young, right? They're still a young team. Their right tackle, I think, is I believe he's a sophomore. Don't quote me on that. On the defensive side of the football, you got sophomore starting in the secondary. You got a freshman on the defensive line. And that freshman is not an average freshman. That guy's going to be a top 5 pick when that time comes. Honestly, he might be a top 5 pick if he was eligible to come out this year. Like, the guy is incredible. And I know statistically it might not actually show, but trust me, I watch this guy's tape every single week, right? As a scout for the Hula Bowl, one of the things that I get to do is watch tape on pretty much any team that I want. And Deion Stewart's one of those guys that we watch. And, there's some guys that are good players. They get to the quarterback, but then there's guys that are just different, right? The way they move is just different, right? Will Anderson, Dallas Turner a little bit more recently, Myles Garrett. These guys just move differently. And Deion Stewart kind of falls in that same category. So just imagine what he's going to be in, 2, 3, 4 years down the line. So, let's get back into this game a little bit. One of the things I felt like was a turning point in this game, 17-0 at one point. The halftime was kind of coming down to a close. I felt like one of the key plays was Harold Perkins strip sacking LaNorris Sellers. Sellers is obviously a little inexperienced still. That strip sack, I felt like changed the game a little bit because one of the things that was happening at that moment when South Carolina had the momentum, they were up. LSU did score, but South Carolina started answering back and they started driving downfield a little bit. And then essentially that right there was a strip sack that basically gave LSU the ball at I think a 35-yard line. And they were able to kick a field goal. And essentially before halftime, LSU was able to cut the lead down to 8 points. To me, that was absolutely a positive for LSU, right? That was one of those moments where if LSU was down, let's just say the score was like 24-6 or 24-8 or whatever going into halftime, it's not as clean as 24-16, right? Only being down 8 points. To me, that was a massive part of this game, right? I felt like South Carolina made some mental mistakes on their side of the field. There was also a play in this game that could have basically ended the game, right? I think South Carolina was already up. I believe they were up 1 point at this point. And, I'm sorry, they were actually up 4 points at this point, and they had a pick six. And that would have essentially ended the game. And the pick six ended up putting back on a personal foul. So a personal foul penalty brought this play back. Should have been a pick six. Would have made it a 2-possession game with 6 minutes left. I think the game would have been over at that point. Instead, the personal foul, although South Carolina was able to intercept the quarterback and they had the ball, it wasn't a pick six, and they ended up punting the football away, right? And at that point, it was still a 4-point game. LSU drove downfield on the next possession. I think there were like 3 minutes left when they got the ball. They drove downfield. They had a couple of penalties that kind of helped them get into range. And they scored a touchdown, and, the momentum was kind of gone at that point for the Gamecocks. But I will say this, Robbie Ashford came in, and he did a pretty good job, right? It wasn't great. There were a lot of moments within the moments he was in the game where it was kind of ugly, but he did a good job in terms of still giving the Gamecocks in an opportunity to tie the game, right? At the end of the game, you had a field goal that would have potentially tied it, and the kicker just pulled it a little left. And it's unfortunate because if the Gamecocks were healthy, if penalties went left versus right, South Carolina wins this game. And going into the next couple of games, this team's going to be ranked, right? They would have been ranked, and more than the ranking, right? The ranking's just one aspect of it. To me, South Carolina is one of the better schools in college. To me, they're one of the top 15 teams right now in college football. And I know playing against LSU, not being able to beat LSU is going to hinder that a little bit. But LSU is also one of the best teams in the country. I know they're ranked 16th specifically because of that game against USC, right? They weren't able to beat USC. USC is a really, really solid school in itself, right? USC, I think, has finally built themselves the defense. And I think that was one of the big factors that would have allowed Lincoln Riley and that team to potentially win a championship. And, to me, LSU barely lost to USC, right? It was a close game. And South Carolina almost beat this LSU team. So, to me, I know it sucks and it's almost kind of bittersweet. If I'm South Carolina, man, I'm excited for the future of this team. You have some young players. You have some upside as a team. I think coaching for South Carolina has been on point as well. And honestly, I think last year was the worst South Carolina team you're going to see in the next 5 years. In fact, this year is going to be the worst team you'll see going forward, right? At least just forward thinking. Now, there are a couple of things I want to see from South Carolina. I want to see the defensive line be a little bit more consistent. To me, I think the defense that South Carolina has is good. But one of the things I noticed watching South Carolina's tape last week is from a scheme perspective, they do things that kind of mask the fact that the defensive line is not always generating pressure and getting home. And that's, I'm not saying they're a bad defensive line, but, you can't have one or two guys carry a deep defensive line. Especially when you take on an offensive line like one that features Will Campbell or Emory Jones, two guys that are going to be NFL tackles, right? Two guys that might be first-round picks. To me, South Carolina has to get a little bit better on the defensive line. But I do like, from a scheme perspective, what they do on the secondary. One of the things that South Carolina does a lot is they simulate pressure. And you can tell that when they simulate pressure, guys that drop back, they look for guys, right? They're not just dropping back into space. They look for guys. And then the pressure actually gets to the quarterback. Obviously, against a quarterback like Garrett Nussmeier, you're not going to necessarily always get home. He is a little inexperienced himself, but he's smart enough to get the ball out, right? Again, this guy, some people are saying he's a top 10 quarterback. Obviously, he had to prove it. I don't think he's played like a top 10 quarterback yet, but we'll see if he kind of continues to get better. South Carolina also struggled to stop the run a little bit. It's a little concerning to me, but I would also say LSU has a really, really, really good offensive line. Arguably, LSU's offensive line is one of the best offensive lines in the country. Then they got two guys at the tackle position that are going to be like top 10 potential picks. Their left guard, Garrett Dellinger, is another guy that's on my radar at least. for the Hula Bowl, right? So it's another thing to kind of keep in mind. Then they got some guys, right guard Miles Frazier. He's pretty solid. They got some depth players on the offensive line. And then they got a good quarterback that can move, a quarterback that can read and play within the structure of the offense. And then the freshman running back, Caden Durham, came out of nowhere, man. Durham's looked good in the past, right? We've seen some flashes from him in the past, but the opportunities he had against South Carolina, he took advantage of those opportunities. And there were some missed tackles that ultimately led to LSU being able to score a couple of touchdowns. Durham had 2 touchdowns, and the 2 touchdowns he did have also were missed tackles, essentially. And then also I felt like for LSU, Kyron Lacey looked really, really good. And he made key plays when LSU needed those plays, right? If South Carolina was able to take advantage of those few plays, right? I think late in the game, there was like a 3rd down play where Garrett Neismeyer was able to hit, I think it was Lacey down the left sideline. They reviewed the play. I think Lacey actually ended up dropping the pass as he hit the ground. I wasn't 100% sure if I agreed with that call, but it stood. And then I should also touch on this a little bit. South Carolina, Raheim Rocket Sanders, phenomenal running back, man. He had I think it was a 69-yard touchdown. I believe that's what it was. Massive touchdown, man. To me, South Carolina kind of, the momentum had shifted away from them, and then Sanders' massive 69-yard run kind of brought that energy back, right? To me, that was a really, really good game. It does suck that South Carolina lost this game, but they have a bright future, man. Very, very bright future. If there's any players you guys want to watch tape on from the South Carolina team, drop a comment down below. We will be doing film breakdowns on this channel. We'll also be covering South Carolina as we kind of go forward. A very, very solid team. I think they'll bounce back. And if I didn't say it, LaNorris Sellers' ankle injury that he had that essentially knocked him out of the game, based off of some of the reports that are coming out, it's not a big deal. He should be good to go. So hopefully he's good to go. And we'll see what ends up happening. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Thumbs up, subscribe, and I will see you guys next time with another video.